Hello, welcome to another episode with Aman Gill. In 1867, the first ever Prime Minister of Canada, John A. Macdonald, sent a letter to India asking for an army of Sikhs to build, protect, and serve this country. The irony here is that in 1988, my guest, Baltej Singh Dhillon, was initially denied entry into the RCMP for being a Sikh. At that time, the dress code banned turbans and required clean-shaven faces. His dreams caused heated debates and protests across the country. Many critics felt that Canadian tradition was being sacrificed for the needs of immigrants. Baltej Singh Dhillon has spent 3 decades as an RCMP officer and has been a pillar of the communities he has served in for all Canadians. Welcome, Baltej.
Thank you, Aman.
It's just an honor to have you here and talk about your life. And it couldn't be any perfect timing than we are in this time right now where the police reform is there. So I'd like you to touch a little bit base on that. I know in many countries we have things that we are very proud of, and we are still learning from them, and we have made mistakes. How do you look at Canada after everything you have been through?
Well, it's a journey. I think in any home, even in our own families, we will have times where we don't agree with each other. Even siblings don't agree with each other. And at that time, there's opportunity to have discussions, to have respectful debates, to educate each other, and then to land on a path forward. As long as that path forward is one that is keeping with, the ideas and our collective concern and desire to be respectful of each other, and every step that we take forward is a step that makes this country better, then it's fine. It's okay to have discussions. It's okay to have arguments. It's okay to have debate. Keeping it respectful, keeping it kind, and keeping it in a way that a brother or a sister would have that discussion is important. So at the national level, I think Canada has gone through a number of changes over the years. We have learned from our mistakes. I mean, it's not too long ago, as you said, 1867. And it was only about 150 years ago, that we had, our Indigenous brothers and sisters and families that were ripped from their homes and taken into, residential schools. And they're still suffering from that pain, and they're still, coming out of that. And we've had our Chinese immigrants and our, Asian immigrants and South Indian immigrants and East Indian immigrants and that have come into this country and were treated unfairly as well. Used and abused, but not, given the same rights as maybe the European immigrants were. So I think these are not in any way, shape, or form there to poke anybody today, but rather this is our history. And I think we need to claim our history to be better tomorrow. There's very little value in being, in a place of ignorance or not acknowledging the history that we've come from, the mistakes that we've made, and taking responsibility for them. If we're going to make any strides forward, we have to do that. That's the only way forward. So, and then once we have acknowledged it, then we do have to move forward. We also can't dwell on that. So I know we speak about the time that I joined the RCMP and some of the challenges that we went through at the time, and I think that was a question that was certainly I've been told that there was a pivotal moment in our country where the question of, are we really citizens of this country? Do we really share in all things that this country has to offer? Are we equal partners and equal recipients when it comes to the charter and the constitution of this country? And those were questions that were asked at the time. And I certainly, for one, feel that this country answered it loud and clear that we are, and that this is a country that is prepared to make changes and allowances and accept all into this country. And we acknowledge that we are all settlers here. Some have come earlier than others, but we are all settlers except for our indigenous community.
You talked about you mentioned about your coming into RCMP, and I mentioned that earlier, how it was hard for you. Now let's talk about the resilience. Your case led to legal challenges and tribunals with the Canadian Human Rights Commission and the Federal Court and the Supreme Court of Canada. It sounds like you had a weight of the country, of a people, a faith on your shoulders. How did you manage that stress? Because that is what made you keep on going?
In bite sizes, I suppose. At the end of the day, I think as a 24-year-old young man at the time, applying to the RCMP, my hope and my desires, my dreams were simply to serve in this country. Having done some volunteer work and having worked with the RCMP, I felt really inspired by the organization and people that I still call to this day. At the time, Constable Dan Gibbons, and at the time, and later on, Staff Sergeant Greg Nixon, who were my initial role models in the RCMP. They were the ones who encouraged me. And Corporal Bob Rogalski, who was a recruiter, who said, "You'd make a great police officer." And so these are the people that invited me and welcomed me into the RCMP. Never for once did they stop to think that, maybe there would be a challenge because I have a beard or a turban. And it wasn't until the moment that I was being offered the job by Corporal Rogalski, Bob, that the question was put to me. He said, "Well, we're pleased to offer you a position and would like to join, and you just need to, shave and, and remove your turban, and off you go to Regina." It wasn't even a part of their thinking at the time that this was an important part of who I was, my identity. These are articles of faith that cannot be compromised, or I will not compromise. So when that moment came, there was an awkwardness between two friends sitting in an office where one was saying, "I want you to join and prepared to have you on, but I have this policy that does not allow me to offer you this job if you remain the way you are." And I'm saying to him that, why is it that you don't understand how important this is to me? That this is who I am, this is my identity, this is how I link back to my family, to my father, to all things that are important to me. Why is that not important to you? Why is that not important to this organization? And so in those moments of silence, all these exchanges were happening. Even though we weren't using any words, that was the exchange that was occurring. And walking away from it and saying, "No, I would not." And then later on joining the RCMP and being given, after an incredible national debate with pins, posters, all kinds of hate. And I think that's what I spoke to earlier, is that we can have these discussions without hatred. Mm-hmm. We can have these discussions without ugliness. And that's when we have to stand up. That when we move away from civility to entering into a space where we're attacking each other, and it comes from this place of hatred and evil, that's no longer a conversation. That's just attack. And we have to separate the two. Discussion is welcome. I had a lot of discussions with a lot of people during that time who were genuinely interested. And I would say a majority of them left saying, "Thank you for telling me and sharing with me the history of the RCMP, the history of the Northwest Mounted Police, and the history of the Sikhs who served with the British Empire and who were there in World War I and World War II. And because of them, we enjoy the freedoms here today. So I support you. Mm-hmm. I'm with you. I stand with you." So those are the people, those are the individuals that have a genuine interest in learning, understanding, being informed, then making a decision. And those are the conversations we want to have. The weight of the nation and the weight of the community was very clear. That was on me. And I realized that about 5 or 6 weeks into training, when I had a very, very difficult day in training. And, it was running, self-defense, swimming, and drill, and it just kept on. It became a very, very long day. We were tired, we were exhausted, and we didn't have cell phones back then, by the way, and it was just this phone on the wall, and we all took turns to call home. And I've shared this many times before. I phoned home and I spoke with my wife Saroj, and then I spoke with my mom. And when I heard her voice, I broke down. I got very homesick and I got very emotional, and she heard that in my voice. And at that moment, as we can imagine in Punjabi, how a mother would speak to a son who was feeling a little, shaky at the time, in no uncertain terms, she told me that, I got to get on with it. I have, it's just not me. It's a responsibility of the community, and I don't have a choice but to succeed and get it done. So those were very clear. Those were very clear words and a very clear command. And so as I went through it, that choice was taken away from me to actually worry, concern myself, or be in any way, shape, or form even entertain that idea. So when you speak about resilience, I think resilience comes from that space. What do you allow yourself? What do you allow yourself to actually experience, entertain, enter into? So I think these are decisions that we have to make personally for ourselves. And those moments when we are feeling challenged, we have to prepare for them before we are challenged. I often say to my brother and sister police officers, when we talk about meditation, what I say to them is that meditation is an incredible tool. It's an incredible and important piece. And that was part of what brought me and got me through my training and my, as you say, the weight of the nation, the weight of the community, got me through those times is I had my meditation, I had my practice with me. And what I say to my brothers and sisters and the police and law enforcement and others is that, listen, doing meditation after we suffer an event or an incident or be diagnosed with PTSD is kind of like putting on a bulletproof vest after you've been shot. Meditation is about putting on a bulletproof vest all the time, recognizing that there may be a chance, there may be a time where you might get shot, and being prepared for it. So unfortunately, what we have now is a bit, and some of these are challenges that we're facing in law enforcement, where we have treatment after the fact. Where else, if we had put prevention before the fact, I think we would be in a much better place. So those are all elements, I believe, that contribute to having resilience and being strong.
And not giving up. And your faith, because that's, in today's world, I find when I speak to people, it's like, everybody goes through challenges, but they just don't know how to go forward, how to handle the stress. And you talked about meditation, because these are the tools that are gifted from ages that are there with us that we can use and start from children. Absolutely. And that they're always there. So whenever we have those hard times, there is a tool to go back. Correct. And to go forward.
Correct.
Now, this is such a personal question. I lost both my parents when I was a teenager, before the age of 16. And I'm curious, how did losing your father as a teenager impacted your life?
Well, it was an incredible shock to the system. I mean, here was a man that, was there every day. You could count on him. He was there to protect you. He was there to support you. Someone that you could have a conversation with. Someone there to guide. Someone there to, provide that support. He was a breadwinner. Everything came crashing in. So losing him at the age of 16 did two things. One was I lost my greatest role model, mentor, hero. And then very quickly, I had to assume that role as the eldest son in the family at the time. My brother was in Canada, who was older to me. And so I had to assume that role. And it became, became even more apparent that on my father's funeral, the Ragi Jatha, the Kirtanis, and the folks, the ministers that I was serving with, when they said that, when they shared, and I remember this to this day, the congregation, that if you ever want to, and my father's name was Nachattar Singh, and they said, if you ever want to visit with Nachattar Singh, come and visit with Baltej Singh, because you'll see him in him. And so, sitting there and having that honor to be shared, both, and responsibility as well to be shared, was what, kind of kept me on this path. Because when I came to Canada, one of the traditions at the time was that as soon as you landed in Canada, if you had a turban and long hair, they would take you to a barber, and your family would have you, shave and have your hair cut. So those two moments are joined, because when I landed in Canada, and my brother had already cut his hair, and I arrived home, it was only the next day that my family asked me when I was going to the barber to have my hair cut. I didn't know anybody here. I had no other than my immediate family who was already ready to, take me to the barbershop. Aside from them, I didn't know anyone here. But what I did have was that memory, and was that experience, and was that responsibility, and that honor that had been placed on me in that time at my father's funeral. So those are influences. Those are things that shape and form our decisions going forward. So, when we speak about how important it is as parents to live a life of dignity, integrity, nobility, and grace, so that our children can rely on that, can feed on that, can then also draw strength from that. Well, I've learned it firsthand. And I wouldn't be here sitting here talking to you today if I had just gone ahead with my family that day and said, yeah, let's go to, Barbershop ABC and get this done and get the latest and greatest hairstyle on. But, so all of those were life-changing and life-shaping moments, and decisions where we make in our lives have a tendency to shape our path ahead.
Yes.
So I certainly believe that the Creator and the universe had a particular plan, but I certainly had to pass many of the tests before that plan or that opportunity was gifted to me.
So this question, because I'm just kind of your experiences and very similar to what I have, because I'm the oldest of the family and my father was a police officer. Again, same thing. Anybody said you want to see, my father's name was Turban Singh. That's the daughter. You will see her in him in her. Like, it was my uncle also.
Reflected.
He said, I feel when I see you next to me, I feel my younger brother is standing her, but his strength is with me.
Beautiful.
So the load of that, your dignity, you have to carry because of my father.
Right.
But sometimes I feel like as a person, that gives you the strength to move forward, because you mentioned that. But is that sometimes, the reason I'm asking this question, is that sometimes you feel that that responsibility is put on you, and how you're going to take this responsibility forward, and it's challenge, and you doubt yourself?
Doubt.
Like,
Yes,
what I
of
mean
course.
is a conversation, because we say do these things, but then there's always some fear and doubt behind our head that are we going to able to do this?
Of course.
And that's what, and the reason I'm asking, because that's where we need to tap on and just say how we overcome that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, welcome fear and doubt into your life. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing to be afraid of other than fear itself. Yeah. So I think the having fear and doubt is part of our growth, is part of our maturing. I mean, just coming into your driveway here today, having a giant dog come and visit with us. I mean, if that doesn't bring fear to you, I don't know what would. But that didn't prevent us from coming here. Yes. That we overcame that, and we are. So I think fear and doubt and all these those kinds of issues. Those kinds of things, those elements are there to make us stronger if we utilize them and if we take advantage of them. If we succumb to them, if we become, instead of being victorious, we end up becoming, challenged by them or lost in them, then that's where that opportunity is lost. And I often and I can't quote you who said this, but a quote that I carry with me often is that there are no defeats. There's never ever any defeat. There's only wins and opportunities to learn.
Yes.
So if we come at life in that way,
Yes.
that there is never a defeat, then what are we worried about? Then every time that you go through a moment where you didn't get the result that you wanted, you can't call it a win, then that is even more important, because that's an opportunity where you've learned what to do and what not to do. And I can tell you, I'm still learning, and there's going to be lots of learning still going on, and continue to do that. And that learning is part of what allows you to then have those wins and be victorious and have that victory as part of you. The other part is having a relationship with something greater than yourself. And, so you and I share a way of life and a path and a faith. And that creates strength, that creates energy, that creates confidence, that creates competence, that creates opportunity to be more. So I rely on that. I start my day with a daily practice. And I know that after that hour is done, I'm covered for the next 23. So then I enter into the world fearless.
Yes.
Because I've left my fear within that hour, where I give and commit into something greater than myself. We call it God, we call it Creator, we call it faith, we call it whatever we want. But that's where I prepare to enter into the world and enter into the day. And by entering into the day, having done that portion of it, I no longer have that responsibility of managing the day, because I've left that with the Creator, something greater than myself. And then it's there's really very little fear.
It's like, you give the 10% of everything. So you
Correct.
give your 10% of your day to
Correct.
the universe, the rest 90% is taken care of.
Correct.
You don't have to
Correct.
worry about
Absolutely.
that. There
Yeah.
you go, right? So
Yeah.
those are,
Yeah.
I guess that's so important. And
Yes.
then my next question is like, this, something I read, and I thought it would be good to have this conversation with you, is when we talk about human intelligence. According to psychologists, there are 4 types of intelligence. We know the IQ, the EQ, and there's the other aspect, the social quadrant is the SQ.
Mm-hmm.
There's a new one, adversity.
Mm.
Got it. Right? It's a new paradigm where measure of your ability to go through the rough patch in life and come out without losing your mind.
Right.
Right. So I just want to, because of this, where we are today, especially with our youth generation and people who are actually immigrating to the country, Canada, and they're struggling and everything has stopped because of coronavirus. There's so much happening that, and I find a lot of people who are actually very successful, had professional lives, they are the one who sometimes can't handle this.
Mm-hmm.
They are the one who are not able to move forward. And that's because adversity. And what would be your intake on that?
Well, I think the question we have to ask ourselves, when it comes to adversity, what are we prepared to lose and still survive, right, at the end of the day? So I know that when I was given the opportunity to join the RCMP, and my split-second answer was no, thank you. I want to make sure I don't lose my identity. So that is, you cut everything out. You take out the house, the job, the career, the money in the bank, all of these things, the reputation. Take all of that away. What is it that you're not prepared to give up? And so for me, it was my identity. For me, it was my principles, my discipline, and nobody can take that away from me. That is mine. I own that. So, and at that moment, it was very clear for me. And when he said, well, what, if you don't do that, we can't offer you a job. I said, that's fine, because I can go back to the farms and pick berries, and earn a living and earn, a means to keep myself. We're in Canada. Mm-hmm. In this country, of all countries, there are so many benefits, support, ways to really to move through difficult times, through adversity, with a lot of support. There are countries out there, and that's the other thing, is keeping perspective. Mm-hmm. Adversity is adversity until you find out that someone else has got it way worse than you. So when a child that's 5 years old who's got to walk 10 miles every day to get fresh water and then still not guaranteed that it's fresh water, that's adversity. Right? Not being able to go to your local Starbucks because they're closed, that's not adversity. Losing your job during this time, during coronavirus, because everything is shutting down, is a challenge, is difficult. But I've got to say, there are people that are going through much, much more. So perspective is critical. Make sure we are keeping that in mind. And as we move through this time, it's critical that we also, reflect on who we are, and we may need to remodel ourselves. We may need to reshape and reform ourselves, rebrand ourselves. That's part of what we're going through right now. And so I think we will all get through this. We will all survive this. Keeping our minds focused and sorted is a critical part of this, because our mind is probably the one thing that creates more adversity for ourselves than anything that's going on around us. So managing this portion of it is the greatest challenge always. So if we can do that, we will be victorious over anxiety, depression, stress, all these things that lead us down to a very dark path. And that's where I come back to, if you're not meditating, you're very likely going to start medicating.
Yes. And then in our we you conquer your mind, you conquer the world, right? You have your mind, you make your mind your servant, not you become a servant to the mind.
Correct.
Right. So that's a part of the whole meditation.
Absolutely.
Right. So,
absolutely.
Now, just I've seen you speak, heard you actually speak at many other events, and you always share your personal stories. That how, once you became an RCMP officer, you faced some kind of discrimination after that. And if you don't mind sharing some of the experiences, and I want you to highlight on, yes, you were discriminated, but how you managed to bring the positive out of that.
Well, I think that was going to be a given. I'd certainly, as I walked into the RCMP, and I still remember my first day. And it was a graveyard shift, and I worked nights. And as I went through that night on my first shift, and I knew at the end of the morning, my first sort of interaction with that kind of thinking was with my own staff sergeant, who had invited me to come and see him after the end of my shift. And CBC was waiting outside to do a story after my first shift. And I also had a cold, and I was sick and all of that stuff. So I went and saw him in his office. He kept me at attention. I stood at attention. And when I got to his office, he didn't look up. He was doing some paperwork. And while his head was down, he said to me that he did not agree with the decision that the RCMP had made. He did not agree with the fact that I was allowed to wear a turban. He did not agree that the uniform was allowed to be changed. He was incredibly disappointed, and that he himself did not think this was the right thing to do, and that I should have conformed to the policy or not be given a job. And so, and ended with, but you're here now, the decision's been made, and as long as you do your job, you won't have any trouble from me. And I said, thank you very much, staff. I can't ask for anything more. And he said, you're dismissed. And I, at that point, left the office. So I don't know if anybody else ever went through that type of a welcome, where you're being told by your boss that you just don't look right. You're just not somebody that I would welcome into my detachment. You're not someone that I want here. You're not someone that I want working for me. So that was my day one. That was my start. But that wasn't, it wasn't a surprise to me either. I mean, I knew walking into the job with with 275,000 people signing a petition saying that this is wrong, this shouldn't be done, with people coming on to radio and TV networks saying that this is our Canada. Those people should become Canadians. And that language was used openly back then. And nowadays we hold people accountable when they say you people, right? But that, back, this wasn't very long ago, just 30 years ago, where those people should become who we are. They come here. And these are settlers speaking. These are not indigenous communities. These are settlers that are saying those people, they should become like us. And even in the community, I ran into that. And my approach to all of that was that we live in a country where we believe in the rule of law. And I was an extension of that rule of law. So I needed to represent that. And so often when I came across individuals that did not agree with the decision, I would thank them for their opinion. I would extend my hand. I would share. I would shake their hand, and I would then say, "Okay, well, can we carry on with why you called the police, and let me help you," and then we would move on. So the majority of my experiences were like that, and there were very few instances where the hatred was so much where they didn't even want to interact with me. But we got over that too. Those are other stories. But with the staff sergeant, and this is the human condition, I think it takes a lot more energy to hate people than it does to accept people. So it took a lot of energy for him that day not to interact with me, to keep his head down, to say all those words. Over the next 2 years, I was a constant in that office. I would meet with him. I would say good morning. We would talk. We would chat. We would do things. Things became familiar. And over a 2-year period, I still remember it was not about a 2 or 3 weeks before he got retired. He was going to retire. He went for his last shooting at the range, as a police officer, and I went with him. And when we got back to the detachment, he looked over, and we were still sitting in his car, and he looked over and he said, "Baltej, you're like a son to me." And I at that time, I kind of laughed. I had a bit of a laugh, and I said, "Bob, do you remember what you said to me back when I joined?" And he said, "No, I don't." I said, "That's because you didn't even look at me that day." And I reminded him of what he said to me, and he was visibly emotional, and very, very disappointed in the words that he used, and he was visibly remorseful for how he had interacted with me, and he apologized. He said, I'm sorry, I should never have said those things to you." That's the human condition. If we give our true nature a chance, over time, we will stop to notice the external and begin to interact and accept the internal, which is who we are, which is how we should be, which is why we are. So this is also part of us maturing as a country and as a human being, that looking beyond the color, the creed, the race, the religion, the clothes, the sexuality, all of these things, and to treat each other with respect and understanding, that's the next level. And if we just give ourselves a chance to do that, we can. Mm-hmm. We can get there, absolutely. And so there are many stories like that. I had another police officer who said to another colleague that who was an Indo-Canadian police officer just starting Quesnel, said that, "Good thing you don't wear a turban, because if you did, I wouldn't back you up." And I had been working with this police officer for a year on graveyard shift. He was my only backup. He was the only person that I would be able to call if I got into trouble. And for a whole year, I had no idea that he harbored those types of feelings. And then I started to think back on all the calls that I went to where I was alone, and there was risk, there was danger. And even though he knew the type of calls I was going to, I didn't have backup. I mean, the Creator protects, and that's the reason I'm here today. But then I reflected on that. I thought about that. But I made sure that the staff sergeant knew about that, and the staff sergeant dealt with that issue. He spoke to him and made it clear. Now, in this day and age, and I think that should have been the case there as well, when someone says something like that, they no longer belong in the force.
Mm-hmm.
They no longer belong in that organization. That's absolutely a line that you do not cross, where you say, I'm not going to back you up, or I'm not going to support you. I'm not going to come to your aid
Mm-hmm.
as a fellow police officer. If you're not going to support a fellow police officer who looks different from you, then how are you going to help support others who are not in the organization?
Yes.
So we've come a long way.
Yes.
And back then it was a talking to. I hope today it would be a thank you very much. We no longer need your services. And I think it's got to be that sharp, and it's got to be that quick, and it's got to be that clear. And all that's going on around the country now, and in the States with Black Lives Matter, the reform with George Floyd, all of these things are certainly causing us to reflect on what is it that we expect from our law enforcement organizations and agencies. We expect something greater, more, higher, better. And so I think we can achieve that. I don't think it's beyond our capabilities.
The conversations that you just mentioned, the experiences you had when you were talking, what I felt like, there are people, when somebody gives that comment, you can take that as a hatred and go away and actually create a different feeling, and you can hurt yourself internally a lot. Where you actually took that and gave that love out, that you wanted that other person to accept you and love you, and you're persistent of being there.
Yes.
And that way of giving, I mean, that's something not everybody realizes, that love is more powerful than hatred.
So I must give credit to where credit is due. So these are not my philosophies.
Mm-hmm.
These are teachings from the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj. These are teachings from the Quran. These are teachings from the from the Bible. These are teachings from all scriptures. I've just operationalized them.
Mm-hmm.
When we read from the script, if we say we have these teachers, these wonderful teachers, Jesus being one, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, another, and all of our 10 teachers, Buddha, all of these teachers. If we call them teachers, then the only thing that we can honor them with is by applying their teachings. It's not enough that we read a book,
yes,
because all that is just reading. Until we move concepts into operations, that book is simply theory. Those words are simply theory. So this discussion about compassion and kindness, this love, this comes from there, where our teachers, Jesus and others, all shared how to, you can either become somebody that is projecting and inspiring and uplifting and elevating, or you can become someone that begins to, be subjected or compromised by whatever is coming your way, right? Whether that's hatred, whether that's someone's opinion, whether that's how someone sees you. And that's where the shift has to occur. Because I think, it's not about changing the other. Don't worry about that part.
Yeah.
Work on yourself.
Yes.
Change yourself. Work on yourself. Develop yourself. Build yourself. Create resiliency in yourself. Smile for yourself, be greater for yourself, work out for yourself, and meditate for yourself. Because, when we do that, by the mere effort of making ourselves better, we will make the people around us better. It just happens that way. It is one of the laws of nature that when you make yourself better, others around you that feel you and are next to you will also become better. It happens naturally. But if we are weak, if we don't put in practices into our lives and don't commit to principles and disciplines. Don't have anchors that we can drop and hold on to during a thunderstorm, during a storm in the ocean, and so that our ship is not wrecked on the shore. If we can't be that lighthouse to warn ships away so that they don't come close to that risk or that danger, if we can't be strong the moment when we're tested, then we will break. Then we will be on that shore. We will be thrown against the rocks. That's when those words will become like knives. Those words will become bullets. Those words will, absolutely, completely shatter who we are. And then that person walks away and we're left with anxiety, with depression, with stress, with this doubt, with this question about, are we? Am I? Well, you are. You don't need to ask anyone, the individual, the person itself. And these are all in the teachings. It's about, as you said earlier, conquer the mind and you shall conquer the world. And so it is about self-development at the end of the day. And all these teachings are just, you can find them in Covey. You can find them in all of these other inspirational leaders that are out there talking today. Well, they're all grounded in these spiritual teachings that if we only take a moment to actually operationalize, we will find all of the treasures within them.
My last question. Now you're retired from RCMP. So what's your next step?
So I actually wasn't ready to retire. I was going to continue working in the RCMP and actually was even being considered for promotions. The opportunity came along where the province of British Columbia was about to embark on a new illegal firearms initiative. And I was asked if I would be interested in applying to a position of program manager for this initiative, where we would stand up a forensics lab for illegal firearms, put together an intelligence team, and also an enforcement team that would combat and reduce gun violence in British Columbia. It's always been a passion of mine to engage gangs and organized crime directly. And so this was a vehicle for me to be involved in an initiative, in a project that I saw opportunity to also expand into other areas. So that is why I retired. And so currently I serve as a program manager for the Crime, Guns, Intelligence, and Investigative Group for the Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit in British Columbia. Well,
you're still in there then.
I'm still
so
in
we have not lost you
yet. No, still a police officer,
but,
yes.
Well, thank you for coming and having this conversation with me, because I always admired you when I first came to Canada when I was 16, and I remember how you fought. Like, it was very new. That was 26 years ago. And I wanted to be myself. Like, my father was a police officer, so I read your story and I was very inspired at that time. And I will tell you, I wish I can meet this man one day. And thank you for coming and having this conversation.
It's very, very kind of you, and it's my privilege to be able to sit with you here today and share some words with you.
Thank you for watching. Leave a note in the comments and I would love to hear from you. To find links and additional resources from the show, visit amangill.com. See you on the next episode, and until then, stay inspired.